Hi, everyone. I'd like to thank you once again for coming to another episode of Unstoppable Mindset. And if you're new to the podcast, we hope you enjoy our episode today. We're glad you're here wherever you may happen to be. Today, we are communicating a long way away. We're communicating with Melbourne, Australia, to Paul Bugeja. And Paul is fondly known as a quizmaster. We're going to have to find out more about that, but he's had a lot of interest in acting and media and such things as that, and has had clearly a pretty adventurous life. And again, I'm sure we're going to hear a lot of that today. So, Paul, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. We're really glad you're here.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
So why don't we start, I love to do this, with the early Paul, kind of growing up and how things all got started, if you remember back that far, or at least as far back as you remember, or what you were told anyway.
Pretty standard, childhood story for me. Grew up in the green leafy sort of suburbs of Melbourne, did all the things that kids do in their growing up years. My mother actually divorced my father quite young for me. So that was a little bit of a critical sort of point for a child to sort of, have to grapple with. But it was pretty smooth, and, it didn't really disrupt my childhood, except it meant that I moved around a lot when I was quite young. So I probably moved about 7 or 8 times by the time I was maybe 8 years old. But I think in a way that sort of has worked for me, because it meant that even as a young child, I had to learn to adapt and change and evolve very quickly, particularly when it came to meeting people. And, as a child, obviously making friends, that's one of the trickiest parts as a kid sometimes. So I think that actually stood me in good stead in that regard. Yeah.
Well, I didn't have to move a whole lot growing up. We moved from Chicago to California when I was 5 and stayed in the same house. Since college, I have moved a bunch of times, but those things happen. I understand what you're saying. I'm used to it, but am of the opinion that I'd rather not move again. It is a lot of work to move, and now also it's just me. My wife passed away almost 2.5 years ago. So I don't want to pack and move again, but
that's fair.
Yeah, well, we're in a house that we built, and so we built it really around her because she's in a wheelchair her whole life. So it's an accessible house, but it's a very comfortable house. So I have no complaints, and the dog and the cat seem to like it as well. So we're here.
It's a win for everyone. And I think, look, that's a really interesting. I had a very similar conversation with a friend yesterday about there's a time to put down roots and there's a time to be a rolling stone. And for some people, that's at different times in their life, So I can understand why you would have chosen to find your comfy spot to settle into and enjoy.
Well, and I have a good mortgage rate and all that. So yeah, we're happy with things the way they are. And as long as the dog and the cat are happy, I can't complain a bit.
Excellent.
But now you're not moving as much around anymore?
Sort of the opposite, actually. I think, to go back to what we were originally discussing, I think having moved so much as a younger person has meant I've lived a life that's almost constantly moving. There certainly have been periods where I've lived for reasonably long periods in the one place, but yeah. Particularly over the past probably maybe 10 to 12 years or so, I've moved literally maybe 10 to 12 times. It's becoming, it almost becomes a bit addictive, sort of the ability to be transportable when your professional life allows you and your personal life allows you as well.
Yeah, I can understand that. For me, I don't want to go through all the rigors of packing and finding a new home and all that. So we're good. But it's okay because I can go anywhere from here, and so that works out pretty well. So I'm content, and that's the way it should be. So we'll see how it all goes. But I'm glad that you did well. So you grew up, had kind of a normal life, even though you moved around a lot. Did all the things that kids do growing up and so on. And where did you go to college, or did you?
Yeah, so my original, I've was a bit of a perpetual student for probably, the first several decades as an adult. My original degree was from the University of Melbourne, which is one of the sort of larger universities in both Melbourne and Australia. And I did a double degree in arts and commerce. But, I had long wanted to be an actor. And so originally, like when I finished high school, my intention was to audition for drama school. But my mother very wisely convinced me to go to university first and then check that out. And if I didn't like it, then maybe audition for drama school a bit later on. And it was, as mothers can be on most occasions, very sagely advice from her. Because the thing that she wasn't aware of was that even though I definitely enjoyed the academic aspect of my studies at Melbourne Uni, it has a very strong theatre department as well. And very big names have actually been through there and gone on to bigger and better things. Namely Kate Blanchett. She was one of my colleagues back in the day. So it was a proving ground for talent, and so I did a lot of theatre during my studies at the University of Melbourne while completing the academic side as well. So I never quite lost that sort of underlying desire to maybe go on and study acting and maybe do some acting. I actually completed the final year of my degree at Cal at UC Berkeley, which was an amazing experience, and sort of also launched me into the next part of my life. So that was at a time when, I think in a lot of ways, more and more students were traveling between countries to study. It was becoming a real thing to study overseas. So it was such an amazing experience to finish at Cal.
So do you keep in touch with Kate at all?
Haven't seen Kate in probably maybe 20 years or so. We kept in contact during the beginning of her career, of course. And then, that life has taken her to such places that it's almost impossible
to keep in touch, right?
That's right. But, I dare say, I think she's probably maintained the sort of personality and character that she had when I knew her, which would mean that if I bumped into her on the street and I said hello and gave her a bit of a nudge about where we knew each other from, she'd be the first one to lean into that and be quite happy to reminisce on old times as she's not an aloof sort of person. That's my feel about her, even given her amazing success.
I've never had that impression of her either, so I'm with you.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty cool. What took you to Berkeley for your last year?
Yeah, so I actually started working during my studies on campus at the university, and I worked in the international student office. So I was dealing with a lot of incoming study abroad and exchange students, which meant I began to have a real desire to do the same thing myself. And initially, I was looking at a couple of other universities like Georgetown. I think NYU was one of the options. And I actually met a guy from Cal who was like, you should come to Berkeley and study. It's an amazing institution. You'll love California. It's so similar to Australia. And I'd actually been to California before my first overseas trip when I was 19. And so I had a taste of California already. So initially I was looking at the whole sort of Cal system, the whole UC system. So I looked at UCLA, UCSJ maybe. And anyway, and then I fell on Berkeley as the final one, just because what a great city to live outside of. San Francisco's such a beautiful city, and so I ended up spending an entire year there, which was just like life defining.
What'd your mom think of that?
Typical of mums. There was a lot of tears at the airport. But, and this was, like at a time when social media was really not even happening. So it was all about the phone calls regularly. But she was happy. I'm very lucky in that, even though I'm an only child, mum's not a clingy mum. She has always encouraged me to just go out and do everything that I possibly can. And she would rarely, get in the way of me living out my life and my dreams.
Is she still here?
She is, yep. She's 78, so she's, still a youngish older person. And even though we don't we sort of, see each other as much as maybe I'd like, because we don't live in the same place, we talk every 2 days or so on the phone, and I stay in regular contact. And it's still a very, very strong relationship.
That's cool. Well, that's a
Yep,
good thing though. So
it is.
you went to Berkeley. You were here. You were
Yep,
out here in California for a year, and then what
yep.
happened?
Uh, well, I actually I bounced back to Australia, feeling very encouraged to follow my acting pursuits because I did a couple of shows at when I was at Cal. I did one drama class as well in the drama department. You know, made some lifetime friendships and felt very connected to myself as an actor again. And so, even though originally my plans were to apply to become a diplomat through the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the acting thing was a bit too strong. So I came back and felt a little not torn, but certainly I had to weigh up the competing desire to want to be an actor against the fact that I had a great degree that I could maybe go on and do something completely different with. So in fact, I spent a year thinking about that and ended up quite on a different track and enrolled in a Master's of Environmental Studies. Which was something that interested me definitely, but decided that I would audition for drama school as well, which I did do and I got into. So I did 1 year of that master's and then I went on to study at the Victorian College of the Arts, which is one of the big 3 drama schools in Australia. And so I finally took that circuitous route to drama school, despite my mum's earlier advice. And she was happy because, I got there under my own auspices in terms of I'd made a decision as an adult to finally get there rather than maybe as an excited teenager who, could obviously do so many things. And so I had both the academic degree and now I was into a program that I'd always wanted to sort of be involved with.
Right. Well, and that's fine. That makes sense.
Yes.
So I'm not sure when to bring this up, so I'll bring it up now.
Sure.
Tell us about your dark angel.
Yeah, absolutely. So probably in my late 20s, I started working at a university back at the University of Melbourne, actually, my old alma mater. And by then, I was actually, I was doing some acting, some professional acting, not a lot of it, but enough to sort of remain interested. So I needed a part-time job on the side, to keep it going as most actors do. And when I started working at the university, I became very interested in fitness as well. I joined a gym and started going to the gym there and made some sort of friends with the local personal trainers. And one day I was doing some training and on one of the big sort of bouncy medicine balls that you can sit on for balance and training work. And one of the instructors came up to me and said, "Do you realize that your scapular wings?" And I was firstly thinking, well, what the hell is my scapula? And then I sort of made sense that it was my shoulders, and I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, when you do upper body workouts, your scapula has quite a lot of movement in it and it's quite visible." Now, I've always been a very thin person. Like I've always sort of we've joked about being a tall, skinny dude, and so I'd never thought anything about maybe the fact that my shoulder blades were a bit more prominent. I figured that was because I was a slim person, of course. So he recommended I see a physiotherapist, and I did. I saw a sports physio in case I'd injured myself or there was some underlying issue. After a couple of sessions with a sports physio, I was referred to a neurologist because the sports physio had some inklings about it maybe being a neurological condition, potentially of some kind, but had no idea what it might be. And this is when I guess my dark angel first really began alerting me to its presence in the background of my life. And I'll explain why I call it my dark angel in a moment. The neurologist and I did some tests and I went in for a muscle biopsy, and I was diagnosed with one of the variants of muscular dystrophy, which is facioscapulohumeral muscular dystrophy. So it affects the face, the humerus and the scapula, but in general affects the muscles across the body. It's a degenerative neuromuscular disease. It's not that common, about 1 in 8,000 have it. So, enough people have it that it's out there. Some people live with it their entire lives and don't know they have it for the reasons that I've just sort of elaborated on, which are it can it can be there, but be so minor that you just think it's because you're a slim person, or you don't have much, you don't go to the gym, so you don't work out, so your muscles aren't growing, or whatever. So yeah, and I was not that thrown by it at the time. It was in our family, so it wasn't that much of a surprise to me that maybe I had it, given that another family member, even though they're quite distant on the family tree for me, also had it. I began to just think about, like what life would be like with this condition. I began to have regular sort of checks with the neurologist and, other sort of allied health professionals around how to manage that. Luckily, it was very mild, and still is very mild in terms of how severe it can be. But as I sort of began thinking more about my professional life, I actually took on an editing and writing degree and a screenwriting degree as I started to move away from acting, because I figured I am a creative person. I love writing, and I want to improve my craft. I was interested in journalism as well, and I could do that as part of this degree. So I started studying, and that then led to me actually writing a couple of books, 4 or 5 books, working as an editor. And then at one point, I began thinking, I think I need to write my own book about my journey with this condition, or, disability, whatever you want to call it. And I had watched the TV show Dexter, which you may or may not have watched. Yep. Mm-hmm. And Dexter talks about his dark passenger, and that's the sort of, it's a weird correlation, I know, in some ways, but that's the serial killer in him. That's his dark passenger. But it really resonated as this idea of there being this sort of passenger in your life, for whatever reason, whatever it is. And I didn't obviously want to steal that sort of figurative term, but I began thinking about a dark angel instead, because for me, it's a double thing. I was brought up a Catholic. I'm not a practicing Catholic anymore, but, the notions of angels around us is something, we all sort of think about, I guess. But the notion of my scapular wing and those being wings as well was very sort of resonated with me. And so I began feeling that for me, my entire life, this dark angel had been somewhere in the background, very, very far in the background, to the point where I wasn't even really aware of that dark angel. And then, of course, when the diagnosis came along, the dark angel began to make its presence more known. And then over time, I live with, like anyone with any sort of disability or chronic medical condition, like you live with it 24/7. And some days it's more of a burden. Other days you not even aware of it. But you have to learn to live with it. And so I now feel like I have this sort of dance with the dark angel, I like to call it, who sometimes is more present in my life and sometimes much more in the background.
So what kinds of things does it sort of limit you, or what do you have to do to make sure you don't let it get too much of a control over you?
Sure. So for me, the biggest thing I ever did was start going to the gym. I did that just out of pure practicality, because there was a gym on campus. It was very easy to join it. It was very close to go to on my lunch break. And so I've now maintained a really rigorous gym schedule, even though my upper body strength is quite weak and limited. I've been able to, I think, my GP and, say, allied healthcare professionals like physios and exercise physiologists and occupational therapists have all commented that my gym program is one of the things that may have prevented the condition progressing more severely than it has. So staying fit has been really important. I think by nature, I like to call myself a pragmatic optimist or optimistic pragmatist. By nature, I'm a practical person. I sort of feel as though, everyone manages the news of some sort of health situation differently. Some people it can lay low, and I understand why, because it can be very confronting, and every condition has a different set of limitations. Like, it can be quite severe for some people. Like my cousin had a different form of muscular dystrophy, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which meant that he was in a wheelchair from the age of 5 and died at the age of 28. So, like in my case, I feel blessed on some level that my condition is slowly deteriorating. But I do think that I'm lucky that I have enough of a practical and positive attitude about not letting it. I never ignore it or deny it, but I just resist it. The resistance is there. Like I push back against it. So mentally, I try to stay positive. Physically, I try to stay healthy. But it does limit me. I have part of the condition. I have something called foot drop, which means that my feet catch a lot as I walk. So I trip a lot. So I have damaged elbows and knees a lot because of that. So as a consequence, I have to be conscious when I walk. It's not like for most people, walking is an unconscious action, of course. For me, it's a conscious action to ensure that I trip less. And of course, as I get older, tripping becomes a thing as you get older anyway, because, your muscle tone changes and, all kinds of things. So, it's about almost in a way you have to become more, you do have to be aware of it all the time, and you have to manage it all the time. But that doesn't mean it has to become a burden. I think in many ways, it's pushed me the other way, which is it's made me have a lust for life. It's made me want to do more. It's probably pushed me to be more nomadic while I can be, just in case there's a point where I can't be. And that sounds a little bit sad, and probably in some ways, but I see that as a positive. Like a really small example I can give you is whenever I visit my mum, like I don't drive, so I use public transport like trains and buses and the like. And if I catch a train to go visit my mum, she always insists, I'll come and pick you up at the train station rather than you walk to my place. And I insist every time, I'm going to walk because while I can walk, I want to walk, so I don't reject her kindness, and I understand it, but it's me saying to the dark angel, no, I will keep walking.
Does she understand it?
I think so on some level.
But she still wants to come and get you.
Of course she does. Of course. There can be the tiniest trickle of rain and she's like, oh, you can't walk in that rain. I've got an umbrella, Mum. No. It's all that stuff. It's delightful of her, and I'm glad, and I'll always expect the offer in those situations. But she unfortunately, and I think a lot of parents will who pass on genetic conditions, because this is a genetically passed on condition for me. She feels a sense of guilt about, having passed on through her line. And so I think she, we've talked about it a few times, and it's not a heavy weight on her shoulders, but she has a sense of it. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that. What was it like when you first got the diagnosis, though? Did it depress you? Did it kind of knock you on your ear in any way? Or did you really decide almost right from the beginning, okay, this is here, but I can deal with it?
Yeah, so I'm writing a book about this, as I was saying at the moment, and in the chapter of the book that I'm writing, I think I wrote something along the lines of life just moved on. Like there was no discernible difference. Like I didn't feel physically any difference because there was no physical difference. But for me, I work in the media, and I've worked in the knowledge industries of any kind for quite some time. Knowledge is power, and I would rather know about something and then be able to have some agency about how to act on it than to bury my head in the sand. But by the same token, I can understand that knowledge can really throw some people. And, I have a friend, for example, who I was diagnosed with MS, and that can be an awful condition to be diagnosed with because it can progress very quickly. And for her, the knowledge wasn't great. It's been a very big challenge for her. But 5 years on, now that she has much more knowledge about it because she's had to live with it, she's going the opposite way. So, everyone is different. But for me, the knowledge actually catapulted me forward rather than weighed me down.
Well, that was a choice that you had to make, or that you got to make, and you made it. And you're choosing to move forward with life, which is great. Yeah.
I feel lucky. As I said, I know not everyone can make that choice because of their own set of circumstances, and I do feel lucky about some of my circumstances, and so I don't think everyone can necessarily be that practical or optimistic about things, but I encourage people to take a breath and try and sit with whatever it is that they have to manage at any particular time, because a lot of people have a lot heavier challenges than I do, and they meet them as well. So it's possible to meet your challenges, I think, even if it limits you still.
Well, so it's something that you live with and so on, and I appreciate that. What makes you get out of bed every day and move forward, or is that what you've been describing?
Look, I think, I mean, I'm a lark, so I'm up at about 4:30 in the morning, and I'm a Monday person, and I had this conversation with someone just this past Monday at the gym, who dragged herself into the gym, and she was, oh, I can't be bothered. I hate Mondays so much, blah blah blah. And I get all that. People love their weekends and a break. I love the beginning of a day, and I have no problems getting up because I love the thought of there being so much in front of me, and even as I grow older and life obviously begins to go into a different phase, I still feel there's so much ahead, and it sounds a little bit Pollyanna of me maybe, and a little bit overly optimistic and a little bit Hollywood, but I feel so hungry for life, and even though that doesn't mean my life is perfect by any means, and that every day is perfect, and that there are some days that are challenging, I face that all the time, as do we all in our different ways. But I just feel so eager for the things that, I have a great professional life, I have a great personal life, I have great friends, I have a good family. My health is fine given the situation. Doesn't mean it's perfect, like I've just said, but I don't have much to complain about, really. So, getting up each day is not a hard thing for me. It's a joy most days.
So, are you married?
No, single, and I often frame conversations with this because sometimes my friends say to me, "Gosh, you have a great life," and I say, "Yeah, but I chose." To be single, to not have children, and to not have pets. The three big things that change the course of your life sometimes in a good way quite often, but also I have more choices ahead of me because I am single and childless and petless,
Yep.
But I don't feel, I feel like I could have made other choices about this, of course, and I don't think there is a right or a wrong choice. It's just you have to find the right choice for you, especially when it comes to these big life choices.
Well, and when I got married, my wife and I had discussions about children, and she felt that she didn't want to have a child because she was in a wheelchair, and she felt in her specific situation, it would have been a lot harder on the body, and she would have been in bed a whole lot during a pregnancy, and she was afraid she would lose a lot of the upper body strength and so on that she had. And my belief was that was her choice to make. And so we both decided that we didn't want children. We would very happily entertain our nieces and nephews and throw them out of the house at the end of the day and send them home, which worked out really well.
I can understand that choice, and I certainly I always thought I would be a father. To be honest about that, when I was in my late teens and early 20s, it was forefront of my mind, even though I had all these other adventures planned. And I had a couple of opportunities, actually, probably in my 30s, where I could have chosen to go down that road, and around the time I was diagnosed, I began thinking what that might mean. And I began to not fear passing on my FSHD to my potential children, but because often it passes through the female to the male, so it's less likely to pass through me. But if I had a female child, I might have passed it on genetically to her, who then passed it on to my grandchild. And not that that should stop anyone ever wanting children, but to your point and the way you and your wife discussed the situation, I made a conscious decision that probably, given the life choices I was making around my career as well and personal life, it might not be the best choice. So, I can understand where you come from with that.
So, in your life, what would be the greatest thing in your life, personal or professional, that you've experienced so far?
The greatest thing, that's a great question.
That's a toughie because there are probably several.
Yeah, no, there are. I mean, I think, and this will seem a little sort of not so great. I mean, not as in not great, sorry, but I think the first job in journalism that I got, which was working for The Guardian, the Australian masthead version of The Guardian, that was pretty amazing for me because I had thought, and it wasn't as a journalist, it was as a like a community sort of an audience sort of person, basically. So it wasn't writing and it wasn't generating content, but just to be finally in a media organization after probably 10 or 15 years of always thinking, God, I'd love to work in the media. I'm a real news hound. I love news. I love current affairs. And even though for some it was just getting a job, for me it was taking a step into something that I had thought about for a while, and finally, and working for a really reputable and very well-known masthead as well, that had a lot of credibility. So that was pretty exciting, and that sort of set me on the path of, I think this is where I will stay now if I can, even though, as you would know, the media is under a lot of pressure to sort of evolve with a lot of external threats to the way it works and staying financially viable. So I've sort of put myself into a very hot pot, and I hope I'm not the frog that jumps out. But I don't think I will be. I think I've managed to forge a bit of a career now that will keep me going. So yeah, it's not a life like sort of fireworks sort of moment, but it was certainly the day that I got the phone call saying we'd love you to come and join us, was very similar to the day I got the phone call from drama school saying you got into drama school. It was a real, like, everything felt lifted. I felt like I was floating that day.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah.
So what other kinds of jobs then did you progress to over time?
Yeah, so because I was pursuing acting for quite some time, probably for about 10 to 15 years, really, I had to do what most actors do, which is work a lot of other jobs. Like you just have to. The work is never constant, even for the biggest actors in the world. I mean, most of them obviously work constantly, but like, to be a working actor is never let anyone say that being an actor is not a real job. It's a really hard job, and so I worked for a long time in casual jobs. I worked in a lot of theatres in like the sort of the ticketing sort of area of theatres. So I worked at both the Sydney Opera House and the Victorian Arts Centre, two big theatre. You would know the Sydney Opera House, obviously, but Victorian Arts Centre is another big theatre organisation in Australia. And while I was doing that, I began doing some freelance editing as a book editor. This was where I really began getting interested in content and copy, and I had the part-time job at the university while I was studying and sort of doing all these other casual things and acting. And a role came up working in digital sort of content with a large betting agency, so sports betting, which is very big in Australia, and it was managing their blog, their sports blog. So lots of content about what's happening in all the different sports, but sort of a marketing / copy role. But it was my first foray into digital content, and this was at a time when it was really starting to amp up, and that therefore made me really think much more about journalism and wanting to pursue that. So that was sort of the springboard into working in digital marketing, working as a sub-editor, and then sort of finally landing this role at The Guardian, which didn't last super long, unfortunately, because I was completing a master's in publishing and communications at the time, and discovered that I'd left Melbourne to move to Sydney to work in the role, and had two subjects left, and I'd been told by the university that I could complete them in Sydney, and then I was told by an administrator that was not possible. So I had to leave my job at The Guardian to go back to Melbourne to finish the master's, which was fine to do, and I kept doing other casual kind of jobs and contract roles while I did that, but it meant leaving The Guardian, which was a bit disappointing, but it meant I got my master's, which was really critical because, again, that was more of a springboard onwards. In fact, as part of my master's, I went to China and did an intensive class in Shanghai. And from that, got offered a role in China, in Shanghai, with a Chinese media company that produced content for the very big expat community in Shanghai. And I was about to leave to go to Shanghai to take up the role, and you'll probably will have a wry smile, which was February 2020. And fortunately, not long after that, everything kind of went pear-shaped with COVID. And so I had to, I mean, it's sort of lucky in a way because Shanghai had a pretty awful time during COVID where it was a very strict lockdown. So I probably dodged a bit of a COVID bullet in that regard, even though Australia had its own share of lockdowns. But yeah, so that sort of threw a bit of a spanner in the works of what looked like the next part of my media career. But then, of course, you know, I'm a fatalist. I run with fate. I don't push back against the things that sort of maybe look like negatives or take us off our path. I just feel like it's another fork in the path that takes us on a route that will hopefully get us to where we're meant to be. And not taking that role meant, of course, about a year later, I saw the job with Stuff, which is the New Zealand media company that I currently work for. And that was the middle of 2021. It was based in Auckland. We were still in the middle of COVID, but I applied anyway because why not? And they offered me the role pending the borders opening effectively. And luckily for me, there was a 2-week window where New Zealand and Australia thought things were going to go okay. And the borders opened and I jumped on the first flight out and got myself to Auckland. And then I started my current job, or actually a different version of my current job with Stuff.
And what is your current job?
So I am currently, I create digital content for Stuff, or Stuff Digital as we're called now. I mostly create trivia quizzes, so fun daily quizzes that we have a very, very dedicated audience for. People love a quiz. I also create a word puzzle called The Hard Word, which is an anagram kind of puzzle. I create that every day. I create a news quiz for them. I also help manage the community, the online community that interacts with us as another part of my role, which is the role that I originally went to New Zealand for, but as a full-time gig. And now it's just sort of part of my role. So yeah, I am a quizmaster. I love it. I had previously worked in television quiz shows during my time in Australia when I was juggling other stuff. So I had a bit of a background in quiz question writing and quiz research and verifying. And so I'm now really in such a wonderful job. But I always like to be very clear about this to people because it sounds like the best job in the world. Wow, sitting and making cool quizzes every day. It's a really involved job, and it takes a lot of kind of like time to research and put together these quizzes because you know you're trying to please a very broad audience of from 15-year-olds to 75-year-olds. So it's a very involved job, even if it's a fun job, and so it does it does still have a very critical kind of like professional aspect to it, even though it sounds like to some of my friends and people who learn about it the best job in the world.
Well, I'm sure it's a great job, but it is clearly a challenging job. Have you ever encountered people who talk to you about making your quizzes or trying to work with staff to make quizzes and some of the things they do more accessible? So like people who are blind can solve the quizzes or work the quizzes and use screen readers and so on to do the same things that others do? Excellent
point. So, I feel quite often when I'm making my quizzes that clearly they are for an audience that can access them very easily, as opposed to an audience that might need assistance to access them. And we do the basic stuff as you must, like putting in alt tags so that people who maybe are able to use to access the quiz as an audio rather than a video rather than a written quiz. But I think you're right. And look, to be fair, I think the way that the media is going very video oriented now anyway. Yeah. I think, which is a brilliant thing for people who do have some access, because with a video, of course, a video quiz, there'll be audio as well as visual, as well as the written word potentially. So there's a way that it covers off all the bases, or many of the bases anyway. At the moment, we are starting to bring in some minor changes, but I think going forward, it's pretty critical because, the world is very aware that people do have some limitations in the way that they can access, especially digital content. And even though there are a lot of great forms of software that you can use to make like your life less limited by whatever sort of limitation you may have, it still isn't as good as it can be. And I think certainly as someone with a disability, I'm an advocate for disability. I'm on the board of a major disability organisation in Australia. I'm on an engagement and advisory committee for the same organisation. I'm very pro and very much an advocate for ensuring that anyone with any form of disability can access and have as great a life as possible, as untrammeled, not untrammeled, that's the wrong word, as a life that has no barricades to them, basically.
Well, the reality is that crossword puzzles, for example, can be made accessible.
Yep.
And of course, I wouldn't expect the organization to suddenly produce Braille puzzles, but there are still ways to do it to create audio, for example, kinds of things. And you mentioned the value of video. That only works if people truly put the appropriate descriptions in audio form with the video, which a lot of people don't do, which is unfortunate. But it is possible to make them more accessible than they are.
Yeah, I agree.
But it is a challenge, and I hope that over time more kinds of things will be accessible. I get the New York Times online, and a lot of what they do isn't nearly as accessible as it should be, and I can see how it could be made more accessible, but they haven't just been really willing to do it. And ironically, a lot of the media has been one of the places where access has truly not been addressed nearly like it should be. And the result of that is that there are problems. And of course they say, well, things change so fast. They do, except that it's all about coding and it's all about understanding programming and coding. And if you do it right and if you know it, you can keep up either way. But, people don't necessarily do that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, look, I'm not going to become a defender of the media, even though I'm part of it. But I think they definitely can do better as an entire sort of profession. I think that the tricky thing for the media at the moment is, and you look at what happened this week, 300 reporters, sacked at the Washington Post. The media is under a lot of pressure to be financial, and that's not a great defense against not being accessible, mind you.
No.
But their mind is on survival at the moment, and that's an unfortunate thing because it means that they can't do the stuff that would actually benefit everyone, their entire audience. So not to defend it, but that's the only sort of rationale I can think of as to why they're not doing more. But that shouldn't stop them trying. Stop them trying.
Well, and I think that's really the issue is that people do need to try and people need to make an effort. And if they would, it would help a lot more than it does today.
Agreed.
So if you could change one thing about your life, what would it be?
Not very much. Like I really love my life. I even, and this will sound quite odd, I even probably wouldn't change having a disability. It's who I am. It's in my genes. It's in my DNA. Like you can't get any deeper into someone than their DNA. Like of course I'd rather not have this, but it doesn't, as we've discussed, it doesn't stop me. It doesn't limit me. It just modifies my life on the edges.
It's just part of you.
That's exactly right. And so I have to embrace that, does anyone with any sort of situation that is slightly left of, what people might call, normal or ordinary, and I always say I try to live my life less ordinary, and I think it's that attitude which really stands me in good stead because when you choose, like like as we discussed earlier, I'm in a position where I can make different choices to people who do have a partner or do have kids or do have a massive mortgage or do have whatever, a job that keeps them in one place. But the old saying about you make your own luck, right? And circumstance does change things, definitely, and some circumstances are outside of our control. For example, having a genetic disability is outside of my control. But you do make your own luck as well. And I sort of feel that I am so about agency, and I'm so about like taking responsibility for your actions, that I feel that everything about my life is because of the choices that I've made, and I want to own that. So why would I want to change any of that? In terms of, if I want to change it, then I will change it. So I think I have a great life. I'm healthy. I'm happy. I've got like I was saying earlier, I have great friends, a good family, a great job. I'm able to, like talk to people like this about things, and like life's pretty good for me. There are things about the world I'd like to change, like as would we all, but those things we can only sort of change on the edges, and I do that as much as I can as well. So,
well, there are things that we don't have control over, and if we worry about them, that's just going to cause us grief. It's not going to bother others.
No, worry. I mean, I worry about some things. Of course I do. We all do. But, eventually I managed to bat most of my worries away, because I realized, as you said, it's usually something that is out of my control. It's funny when I talk to my actor friends, and I speaking for myself, of course, actors have to rehearse. We rehearse for you rehearse for roles and whatever. And that sometimes for me has meant that I tend to rehearse things prior to, the situation. So it means that my mind goes at 100 miles an hour about a lot of things. And that can lead to anxiety and worry, because you overthink, you worry about a situation that hasn't even occurred yet. You're thinking
or that might not ever occur.
Well, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So, I think the biggest lesson I've probably taken as well from my diagnosis, and the thing I committed to this year a little bit as a part of my New Year's resolution, or whatever you want to call it, is to just be as present as I can, like to live in this moment right now. That doesn't mean I don't have an eye to the future, and I don't make plans, and I'm not excited about the future, but I'm trying to be as present as I can, because if you're present, then all this worry disappears in a way, because you just can only deal with what's right in front of you.
Right. Do you have any regrets?
Not really. I mean, like there've been a few moments in my life. So, for example, I can name a few things. Like when I was in my early 30s, I entered the diversity visa program, which is the green card lottery in America. Yeah. And I got it. I got a green card, and so I was all ready to move to the States back in the late 90. Oh no, when was it? Yeah, the late 90s. Yeah. Early noughties. And I got into the writing editing course in Australia. So I was really enjoying that. I was doing some acting and some paid acting work. And so I had a moment where I was like, well, do I really want to take up this green card offer and become a resident of America? I have lived there before when I studied. I travel there regularly to see my friends, and so I had this crunch time. It was a sliding doors moment. And I did visit a few times. I spent a bit of time in the States, and then I eventually dropped the green card. Now, occasionally I look back on that and think, was that a silly thing to do? With what would have opened up to me had I moved to the States? Like, would my acting career have taken off? Would I have ended up working for the New York Times? Like, whatever it is. So there's sort of a sense of regret about it, but it's such a faint shade of regret that it doesn't hold me back. I don't want to be held back by anything in my life. And I think for me, regrets can hold you back too much,
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and it seems to me that it's one of those things that could have gone either way. As you said, a sliding door moment. I think that's a really interesting way to put it. But the fact of the matter is, you made a choice. You're happy with the choice. And you may or may not have been as happy with the choice if you had moved to America, but you wouldn't have experienced a lot of the things that you have experienced. So it's okay.
That's exactly right. So even, occasional relationships that went awry, or, what else? What if I'd stayed pursuing my career as an actor? There are always going to be what ifs with life, and it's the what ifs that tend to cause us regret, I think.
And cause us so much fear.
That's it. That's exactly right. And regret and fear should be the same word effectively, because that's all that's playing. And if you can find a way to manage that as best you can, and look, I always say I try to look down at my feet on the ground to see where I am and to look forward to see where I'm going rather than look back where I've come from. And look, we can learn a lot from where we've come from. And in fact, the book that I'm writing is almost like a detective novel where I track back through my life to see if I can see moments where I might have known that I had FSHD much earlier. So in that regard, I do look backwards. You know, I'm happy to have a critical eye on the past and to learn from it. You know, but I don't ever want it to drag me back to it. I'm always looking to be pulled forward.
Well, that's the operative part, right? There's nothing wrong with looking back and learning from what you've experienced. And more people should do more of that, it seems to me. But
oh yeah, that's a much longer conversation, isn't it?
It is. Who's been the most influential person in your life, and why?
Yep.
Besides Kate Blanchett, but that's another story.
Of course, very influential, Kate, if you're listening.
If she is, I hope she'll reach out. I'd love to have her on the podcast. But anyway,
look, you never know, my friend. You never know. Look, I mean, it's a hard question because, but it's a good question. I mean, there have been so many influences in my life, you know, and I don't want to step on toes by not naming people in a way, but you know, for one really influential person, who has given me, you know, I have a friend who's a film journalist actually, and has written, you know, a lot, mostly about the production side of the industry rather than film reviews. And I feel she only came into my life about maybe 10 or 12 years ago. So she's a relatively new friend, but a very dear friend. And I think I did an internship at a magazine that she worked for, and she was the editor of it at the time. And I think she had a really great influence on my life because she made me realize that I definitely wanted to pursue a career in the media, that I was done with journalism, that working in the media was exciting and interesting. You know, she made sure she pushed me in a lot of ways that I might not have been pushed otherwise. And she's remained a really dear and constant presence in my life ever since. So, yeah, I really feel like her coming into my life at that particular moment really was like critical in a lot of ways. But, you know, she was one of many, you know, that have definitely given me great advice or have been very supportive or have just been there for me. So, yeah, big call out to her. She was being wonderful.
Do you think that if you had never been diagnosed with or ever had FSHD, that your job and your careers would have gone differently? Or do you think that this was just a natural progression and FSHD is there, but it didn't really dictate what you did?
Yeah. I think because of my approach to this situation, which is it's there, but it's not going to stop me. I think that, look, clearly it's a physical condition, so it does limit me a little bit physically. So like I was never going to be, like for instance, even with acting, you know, it did limit me a little bit with acting. Like there were certain things that, like I can't do a headstand, you know, and I know that's a small thing, but like in drama classes, I remember one class particularly I was asked to do a headstand and I couldn't do it. And this was pre-diagnosis. And I just thought it was because I was clumsy or uncoordinated or not muscular enough. So like certainly the diagnosis probably gets in the way of some kinds of careers that I might have pursued. But generally, you know, I'm a computer-based person. I'm a knowledge and content-based person, and I was already going that way pre-diagnosis. So, you know, I don't think it really intervened in where I would have gone. Yeah. Whether it helped me or not, whether, you know, it was part of the reason why I am where I am. Look, I think it's part of the reason of everything that I do, you know, even if it's not always the defining reason, but it's a consideration, definitely.
Well, it is. And it's helped build your resilience, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, and that's right. And I'm in a career that requires resilience. And so it definitely, in that regard, yes, it's helped me build that further resilience.
So there you go.
Yep.
Has AI helped you in terms of any of the things that you do on your job? Do you use it to help in finding out information about quizzes or that you put in quizzes or any of that? Has AI been a useful tool for you?
So again, we could talk about this for 12 hours. It's one of my topics, right? Especially working in the media. I love the fact that I'm an early adopter, right? I love technology. I embrace it. I'm that guy who gets the new iPhone, not every year, but every other year. I embrace the new, I was doing digital content at the beginning, like not at the beginning of it all, but, I jump in quickly. With AI, I have reservations. I certainly, I tend to still use standard search, but of course now with Google search, AI is built into that Google search. So I am using it in that regard. As a media organization, we have a very strict policy about AI, as one must. We have to be very careful because while it's definitely the next big revolution for everyone, whoever you are, from like a dog walker to a president, like it's going to affect everyone's lives. I feel as though for example, as a media organization, we're encouraged, we are looking at improving the way we work with AI, but there always needs to be a human oversight.
Absolutely.
Yep. And you would appreciate that, of course. So I don't use it in the way I think over time I will have to use it because I won't have any choice. But, we in the media, I think we're looking at, I don't think this is giving anything away, but we're looking at agentic AI more than generative AI, because agentic AI is really useful. If I can ask an AI bot to put together the not the quiz itself, but the actual article the quiz will appear in that goes on the site, well, that's just a practical role you'd give an assistant if you had one anyway, right? So I definitely think the media and me in my role will more and more embrace agentic AI as we're able to build it into our systems to help us with mundane, practical tasks that you'd give the intern, that you'd give the first year journo student out or whatever, right? In terms of generative AI, I've used it a bit just to see what it will throw back at me. And for example, I do a lot of quizzes as a quizmaster because I love to just do quizzes. I can tell a quiz that's been made with AI. It's very clear. I did a quiz the other day, and I kid you not, the first question was, if I'm a Bolivian, what country might I come from? Now, I mean, for an editor or the actual person who put together that quiz not to realize that, that's a pretty awful quiz question, but it's such an obviously AI-generated quiz question, So, yeah, I think, and I'm also very aware that the amount of money that's being poured into AI at the moment is looking like a big bubble that will burst at some point, because they can't keep plowing all this money in and expect big returns, because it's not returning anything at the moment to them, really. That doesn't mean it's not going to continue. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't embrace it. That doesn't mean that it's not going to maybe find a cure for cancer. Like, I feel like there is a lot of positive that can come from it, so long as the humans stay in control.
Well, I think that's the real issue and the operative part of it. I have used AI in writing articles, and the way I've used AI is I've asked it to give me your thoughts on, or write an article about, and I'll do that like about 6 or 7 times, and I will go through all of the things that are created, and it gives me ideas, but I would never let it write the article. And I would never do that because I want it to be me. And even if it could get to the point where it truly emulates me, it's not me, and I wouldn't want to do that. So I'm with what you're saying.
Yeah. And I think that's the trick. I think probably like with all, sort of new ages of technology, whether it was just the internet and then it was sort of probably social media was the next big, sort of critical juncture, and now it's AI. It means that a younger generation that comes along that only knows this. So my probably biggest concern would be, and I don't have children, but for my friends' children and the children that are going to grow up with AI, that they come to rely on it so heavily that they lose the ability to critically think, that they believe everything that AI says, and it will get better and it will get more accurate. but it's still throwing back. So I'll give you one quick example. When I was playing around with it back in 2022, I think, or whatever year the Queen died, Queen Elizabeth II died, I asked it, who's the current monarch of England? And it kept bringing Queen Elizabeth II back, and I kept arguing with it, and it kept saying no. And I started feeding it New York Times articles, Guardian articles, the Telegraph articles. And I kept saying, these aren't reliable sources. Now, this was, back 3 or 4 years ago now, but that really concerned me. And I fear that that's the only fear for me, is that people will lose their curiosity and their own ability to critically think and rely on it so heavily that they forget how to do really simple tasks that we should still be able to do.
If you could change one thing about the world, whether it's big or small or whatever, what would it be?
I actually, so this will reveal me as a bit of almost a communist, but I wish that people's obsession with money would change. I would love to change that. Like, I love that people want to be comfortable and they want good lives, and that we want our creature comforts, and that we want to travel and have a great TV and all that, somewhere to live. But I do feel like greed and the desire to be more than just comfortable is creating half of the problems in the world right now. Yeah. And if I could magically get rid of whatever part of the brain is caught up with that, I would love to change that.
Yeah. Well, if someone came up to you who had a disability or who has some sort of challenge in their life and asked you, what should they do? What would you say?
I would say to them, to take a breath with it, to sit with it, to try and not let the fear of this challenge overtake them, to try and understand what it really means, and to seek as much advice as they can from the people who understand their situation, to talk to others in the same situation as them who've lived that life, because those people completely understand, and to try and embrace it in a way that is not threatening to them, but which can hopefully allow them to move forward with it and not let it become something that holds them back. But as we've talked about earlier, that's something that can still let them live their best life,
There you go.
Yep.
Well, Paul, if people want to reach out to you, how can they do that?
So I am one of these, even though I talk about being an early adopter and grabbing a hold of all new tech, I'm not on social media. I just decided to give that up a few years ago when I felt it was going a way I didn't like. I am on LinkedIn though, so people can just, Google my name on LinkedIn and search for my name on LinkedIn and find me.
Can you spell your name?
Sorry?
Spell your name if you would.
Yeah, sure. So it's Paul, as in Paul, and the surname is Bugeja.
Okay.
I do have a website, which I don't really use so much anymore. It was more for when I was a contractor and looking for work on an ongoing basis. And it's, but it is there, and there is a contact page on it. And it's just www.shipoffools. So shipoffools.com.au. I'm actually about to revamp that site again, because I feel like I should have a digital footprint that, has things like this podcast on it, that has articles I've written. I write a lot of travel content, or quite a bit of travel content, and that's all just out there, but it should be in one place, and also just a place of my own, a little spot on the net. So
there you go.
That will hopefully get amped up in the next couple of months.
So you're writing a book. Have you written other books?
I've written a few, I like to call them airport books, because they're certainly not Nobel, literature prize winning books. I've written a great book on stories about famous Australian dogs, for example, called Aussie Dog Tales. I've written a book about crimes of passion that sort of rocked Australia. I've written a dream dictionary. I've written a book on Aussie slang. So they're kind of fun, easy reads. Most of them are probably out of print now, because I wrote most of those back in the late noughties, early teens. But some of them are still available out there. I guess, I'm sure a couple are still in print. So, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for being here with us. We've been doing this for over an hour. Can you believe it?
I know. Well, that went like a flash, my friend. Thank you so much.
Well,
it was great to talk.
and now we do need to let you go get breakfast, but I want to thank you again for being here, and I want to thank all of you for listening. I'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to email me and love to hear your thoughts on our podcast episode today. You can email me at speaker@michaelhingson.com. Michael Hingson is MICHAELHINGSON.com. Love it if you'd give us a 5-star rating wherever you're monitoring our podcast today, but also, more important than a rating, give us a review. I'm sure Paul would love to hear and see good reviews. We would as well. So please give us reviews, because people who are interested in the podcast are more interested if they find that people give reviews that say, we like this, you should come and listen to it or watch it too. If you know anyone who ought to be a guest, let us know. Paul, you as well, and we'd love to have them come on, because I want everyone who wants to tell a story to come and tell their stories. But for now, thanks again, Paul. This has been absolutely fun. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here today.
No worries. Thanks a lot, Michael.
If you're ready to go deeper into the ideas that shape how we see ourselves and others, I have a free gift for you. Head over to michaelhingson.com and download my free ebook, Blinded by Fear. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep choosing to live with an unstoppable mindset.